Awesome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Canada's Youth Connect. I would like to first introduce myself. My name is Fearns Francis, or my Plains Cree name is Pascual Tus Kawichi Mituema Netsiga-san, and I'm excited to be your host today. I'm a proud member of Pipewad First Nation, located in southern Saskatchewan, currently enrolled into the First Nations University of Canada, and currently serving as the National Student Director for CanDo. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a returning participant, we're grateful to have you here. Or if you see this when it's as a recording. A little more about Canada's Youth Connect is that it is a platform to empower Indigenous youth and allies across Turtle Island to participate virtually to discuss topics such as economic development, lands management, and entrepreneurship. Some past speakers that we had were Don Gadu and Jeannie Grew from the Starbucks Foundation, Chief Treshelle Bunn of the Birdtail Sioux Dakota Nation, Scott Wabino from the Real Rank podcast, and Cassandra Loon with AIIC. Now, without further ado, I'll introduce a little more on today's speaker and the theme we will be exploring today. Aaron Pete is the chief of Chawathil First Nation, a graduate of the Peter A. Allard School of Law, the manager of strategic relationships with Métis Nation, BC, and the host of the Nuanced podcast. Aaron's background, including being raised by a single Indigenous mother with a disability, has given him a deep appreciation for the value of community, and he continues to use his platform to inspire and uplift others. Today, he'll be speaking on Unfolding. The Becoming of You is a journey into the art of personal transformation, the quiet, powerful process of discovering who you truly are beneath expectations, fears, and past versions of yourself. It's about peeling back the layers you've outgrown and stepping into the fullness of your own truth. The journey isn't about striving to become someone else, it's about returning to the essence that's always been with you. Through moments of courage, reflection, and growth, you learn to trust your own unfolding, to see that every challenge, every lesson, and every season of your life has been shaping you into the person you were always meant to be. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Chief Aaron Pete. The floor is now yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege to be here. My name is Aaron Pete. I am Chief of Chawathil First Nation, and this is my second time working with Candu, and it's just been an absolute privilege. And I really appreciate Jessica for all her support in setting these opportunities up. So I'll start just by sharing a bit about my background. My grandmother attended St. Mary's Indian Residential School here in Mission, British Columbia, and she attended that the whole period of her education, and she experienced a lot of trauma, abuse, neglect, and a loss of her cultural connection. And I share that because I think it's important to ground the conversation in an understanding of what our ancestors have gone through in order for us to be here today. And I know that she endured those things to try and pass on a better life to her children. And I'd be interested to know if anybody is open to sharing, if they have a family member who is impacted, a mother or grandmother who's impacted by residential schools, if anybody's willing to share that. Okay, I'm not hearing anybody yet, but that's okay. So I'll move forward and say that some of the pieces that I took away from her experience, were that trauma can really shape an individual's life. And the term intergenerational trauma, I think, is really useful because you can see how it impacts their children and grandchildren. So my mother was born with fetal alcohol syndrome disorder as a consequence of my grandmother using alcohol to cope with the abuse that she faced. And so that meant that she faced a lot of neglect herself. My mother was actually left outside when she was a baby, and the Ministry of Child and Family Development had to take her to Kokolitsa Indian Hospital. Both of her eardrums were blown out as a consequence of being left out in the cold. And so at that location, there was a nurse there that was taking care of her, and she actually took her in and raised her as her own. But that also meant that she was a part of what's called the 60 Scoop, which further disconnected my mother from her culture, but meant that she received the care and resources she needed. And so, one of the people that are my role model is my non biological grandmother, who supported my mother through those trying times. And then my mother ended up having me as a child, and I've never met my father, never had a connection to him, but I was raised by a mother with fetal alcohol syndrome disorder. Independently, and so she was a single mother doing that work. And so I really got to see the full lengths of both the Indian residential schools and the 60s scoop and their impacts on myself. But I looked at what they both went through. My mom has a lot of shame because of her disability, and my grandmother had a lot of shame because of what she went through. And I looked at what they sacrificed as something I needed to put onto my shoulders. That I needed to appreciate what they had done, what they had sacrificed, and what they had endured in order for me to be here today. And so I tried to look at that as fuel, as many people have sacrificed themselves and what they went through in order for me to exist. And I think if everybody here is able to look back at their parents and grandparents, you can see that they've endured a lot in order for you to be here today, whether they fought in a world war, whether or not they endured abject poverty, abuse, all types of things. And they did that so that their children and grandchildren could have a better life. And I think that's always important for us to keep in mind when we think about that seven generations principle is what did they have to do in order for you to be here today? The next piece was just the weight of growing up with those pieces. A lot of teachers and educators did not think that I was going to reach any good height. They didn't think I was going to graduate. I had many elementary school teachers thinking I was going to join a gang and not graduate high school. And so I think it's important as Indigenous people that we keep in mind what other people kind of project onto us, because I think that can also shape how we think about ourselves and what we think we're capable of. And I think one of the greatest gifts you can be given is seeing what other people endured in your family and recognizing that you're capable of incredible things that I can't imagine what my grandmother went through. And so I'm capable of standing up to my teachers, to people who doubt me, to people who think I'm not going to go on to go and do great things, and prove those individuals wrong. And so that was also fuel throughout my adolescence that I was capable of more and that I was being underestimated. And I don't think I showed that always throughout all of my schooling, or my grades certainly didn't always reflect that I was on the right track, but I knew that I was capable of more. So I ended up going on to the University of the Fraser Valley, where I was studying criminology and criminal justice. I had heard a lot about the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the legal system and wanted to understand that issue in a deeper way. And so I ended up doing those 4 years. I slacked off the first 2 years of my education, and did not dedicate myself to my studies the way that I should have. But those last 2 years, what I really took away from it was the respect that I had received from my professors and their expectation that I could do better and be better. And I think that was one piece that I was missing because I didn't have a father figure, was the sense that maybe I'm not capable of more. And when my professor started to go, "You are capable of so much more and you're just not putting in the work," was, I think, a huge compliment and a reminder to all of us that I think we as people often have a bad habit of stopping before we reach our limit. If you go to the gym, you often stop and you get a little tired and you go, okay, I'm probably done for the day. And I think it's important that we regularly try and test our limits, whether they're athletic, whether they're educational, or whether it's a big dream that you have. I think at a certain point we stop telling people to reach their full potential. When a kid is 10, you go like you need to reach your full potential. When they're 15, you say they need to reach their full potential. But at a certain point in your 20s, 30s and 40s, we stop telling people that. And I think that's really tragic because I look at life as just a different chapter in a really good book. And no matter what chapter you're in, there can be a climax, there can be a moment where you go on to do something that people didn't expect you to be able to do. And I think that's a huge gift that we can give people. And being a chief that's 29 years old, I'm regularly blown away by how much my words impact people who are double, triple my age, who don't think that they're capable of more, who are kind of like, well, I'm 45 years old. Like, what? My life is halfway done. Like, what else am I going to do? And telling people that they're worthy, that they are an important part of the organization, and that we're lucky to have them. Like, um, those comments have brought some of our team to tears. Just last night, we were doing our financial review, and I told our finance manager, who's in their 50s, that this is amazing, that they did a tremendous job on the presentation, and they started crying. And it's just I think sometimes when we're young, we think our words don't matter or they're not going to be taken as seriously by people older than us. But I think it's just as important to remind your elders, to remind your parents that they did a good job or they did the best they could with what they had, and that our words really have power and impact on individuals. And so I graduated from the University of the Fraser Valley, and I ended up going on to become a native court worker, where I was working with First Nations people in the criminal justice system, in the court system. And I got to meet a lot of individuals who had never been told that they were worthy. One of like the most standout moments was I had a client who was abused physically their whole life and who had gotten into drugs to cope with that. And the reason that that moment stood out so much to me was because sometimes we want judges to not look as serious, and there's a big push to make judges not wear robes. But when that judge was up there sentencing this woman who had stolen a couple $100 from a Save on Foods, the judge had taken the time to really recognize what the individual had been through, the abuse, the neglect, the disrespect, and the fact that she was just never given an opportunity to reach her full potential. And really just held space for the fact that this person was put behind the eight ball from the beginning and never given an opportunity to share all of her gifts. And she started crying, and the judge started crying, and everybody in the room got very emotional because that's the human element of the criminal justice system, is that being able to recognize who people are and where they had to start out. And that story stays with me because it's just a reminder of the humanity that we need to see in people when they're struggling, but also the position of authority that, if utilized properly, like this judge did, the impact that can have on people. And I think parents and educators and students all have a role to play in trying to make sure that they voice what their understanding is. And I think that was one of my major takeaways. Moving forward, I decided to go on to law school because I saw so many lawyers there who, to be honest with you, were not doing a great job, who the judges would complain to me privately about and say they're just not putting in good effort. And it gave me a lot more confidence. When I was in university, I had friends who said they were going to go on to law school, but they seemed like they had it all figured out, and I did not have it all figured out. They were talking about how their uncle is a police commissioner and they're going to use their reference, and I don't know any police commissioners, and I wasn't going to have those types of references, so I just saw that as impossible. But in speaking with judges and working with lawyers on a day-to-day basis, I understood that that was something that was possible, and I was able to get a crown prosecutor to write a letter of reference. And so I went on to law school, and I will say that I think my undergraduate degree was harder than my law degree because I think it's useful for everybody to know that they grade on a curve in law school. And so you're compared to all of your other classmates, and they have a curve of about 73%. So only one person a year approximately fails law school, fails a class in law school. And so it's very unlikely that you're to fail a course in law school. Whereas in an undergraduate degree, if you don't do the homework, you're going to fail that course. And so there was a lot less pressure to perform in that sense, but it was a very competitive environment. And classmates were competitive against each other. And I chose to focus on the courses that seemed the scariest. So I took taxation of corporations and shareholders as one of my courses, which sounds, I imagine, extremely boring and uninteresting. But I had already always heard that the tax system favors corporations, they favor rich people. Rich people get to move their money around, and I wanted to understand what exactly that meant and how that system impacts people. And so I focused on the courses where I actually thought like most people never learn about what actually that means. And so that experience was rewarding. I got to do it during COVID, so I got to stay home with my family rather than being on a campus by myself. But some of my biggest takeaways were that law is extremely complicated, but that there are always opportunities to go where the majority of people don't go. There's those courses that you hear are easy A's. And I think when you're going through school, it's important to go for the courses perhaps that challenge you or that there's an area that you don't understand that you want to, and seek those opportunities out because I think there's huge growth potential in those areas. And we're now taking some of what I learned in law school and applying it to my First Nation community and trying to look for those same opportunities so we can reduce our taxation and make sure that that money that we're able to save goes back to our membership. So once I graduated, I was trying to figure out what direction to go in. And there's kind of two paths once you go to law school, once you graduate, that are common. One is to go work for a big firm. And many people will be able to think of that from Suits or other shows. And then the other is usually a private practice or something like that. And I looked at both paths and were kind of disappointed in the opportunities. So with a big firm, the the opportunity is you start at a very low level and then you spend 10 years working your way up to an income that's over six figures. But it takes a very long time to get there. And there's an old guard of people that want to sit on their spot and hold on to it. And when you're starting out, you're really billing out all of the hours, doing all of the work, but not being compensated for it. And you have to do that for 10 years before you start to see those larger financial returns. But then what you're doing is you're taking advantage of those lower level individuals and making money off of their backs. And philosophically, I really disagree with that pathway. I don't like the idea of my work being taken advantage of by senior people, and I don't like doing the same to up and comers. And so that left the independent path. And the challenge with that one is I worked with a lawyer over the summer who was independent, and he was working 15-hour days every day. And if he made one mistake, he could be brought in front of the law foundation. And so that one also didn't deliver the future that I understood came with university. I feel like the sales pitch we give to most young people is you go get an education, you'll get a really good paying job for very reasonable hours. And 15-hour days grinding for other people also just did not seem like a path that I was looking for. And so once I graduated, I was reached out to by several elders within my community, and they suggested running for council and getting involved. They said, please bring your education back. We were happy to support you with your education, but we need your knowledge in our community. And so I ended up choosing to run for council for my community. I ran on an actual platform. Many of our community members were used to the same family politics that many First Nation communities have of one large family here, one large family there, and they get all the votes. And so I have a relatively small family within my community, and I ran on a platform of bringing in more funding, addressing the living conditions of houses on reserve, bringing in more housing, and growing our economic development. I had taken several courses in law school about economic development. So that's what I ran on. And I told people, don't vote for me on my last name because I'm not going to help my cousins or anybody out extra because I'm related to them. I'm just here to do a good job. And so I did that. We have 89 homes within our First Nation community right now. We've renovated since I've joined 35 of them. And that's about $180,000 per household that we've renovated. That's new roofs, new windows, heat pumps, furnaces, upgrades to kitchens, whatever their house needs. And that investment is coming from Indigenous Services Canada. So our community is having to put no dollars into those projects. And then BC Hydro heard what we were doing and wanted to get involved and started giving us rebates for that work and started providing us with solar panels. So about 20 of our homes now also have solar panels, which is reducing the energy costs for our members. And we've had some members come forward and say, I was paying $400 a month in BC Hydro, and now I'm getting a rebate back and they're paying me money. And so we're seeing that shift, and a lot of community members have been thrilled about that. We did a housing strategy, which resulted in us applying to BC Housing, which is the only provincial only province that's investing in housing on reserve. And we got 31 new units, which is going to be 104 new beds of high quality housing. As many of you may have experienced or know, often because reserves are federal land, they don't have to follow provincial code when it comes to housing builds. And so often the homes are already built to a subpar level. Many of our basement suites didn't have exits. So if there was a fire and somebody was in the basement, they would be stuck and pass away because there was no other exit in the basement. And so addressing those types of issues. But these new BC housing units are going to be built to provincial code, and they're a long-term $35 million investment from the province. And so those are going to be coming online in about a year and a half, and we're very excited about that. And then the other piece has been childcare, has been a huge focus. So we applied to the New Spaces Fund in BC, and we're bringing online 48 new childcare spaces because that has been the barrier we've heard through doing a comprehensive community plan from our members as to why they're not working. We have about 70% of our members who are on social assistance who live on reserve, and their main reason is they don't have adequate childcare. And so there's only one daycare within my region, which is Hope, British Columbia, right now, and it is at max capacity, and there's a 2 year waiting list. And so us bringing that online will reduce the amount of wait times and allow people to start to look for employment. So those are the two first pieces that I would say are the backbone of the First Nation community. That and making sure our finances are in order. And I won't dive into the financial piece because I don't know if that's the most interesting piece. But the third is economic development. And I'm sure a lot of you hear about that. I know that that's a huge topic for Canada. And I've actually had the opportunity to learn from a ton of Alberta First Nation communities and how they approach things, and have been very grateful for the chiefs and economic development officers who've been willing to share their time to explain their approach. And so, economic development, I would say the key piece from my perspective is first member engagement. What jobs do they want? What training do they have? What training do they want? And where do they want to go with their life? And that's a conversation for the community. There's no point in me investing larger in pipelines or doing stuff like that if my community is very focused on tourism opportunities. So having that conversation first was key. And so we heard back community members wanted still trades opportunities, but very focused on tourism and retail opportunities. And so we took that information and we did what's called a highest and best use study in partnership with a company called Urban Systems. And we looked at the parcels of land we have and determined what we were able to do with those properties that would bring the highest economic benefit for our community. And one of them was a hotel. And so we are currently, I just met with the premier a few weeks ago. We're working on a hotel for our region in order to make sure that we bring those tourism jobs that our community wanted. And so we're doing a geotechnical study right now. We have the plot of land that we're going to develop it on. We know that there's a market need for hotels within our region. We know that our members want those types of jobs, but now it's about educating them now so that they're ready for those jobs when they come online in about 2 to 3 years. And so we're working with local organizations like the Skills and Employment Training Program to make sure that we train them in hospitality opportunities. So when the jobs come available, they're ready to go for those, and that we're actually hiring our own membership. And so doing that as council member provided me a lot of deep understanding of some of the challenges we face, but some of the opportunities. And then just most recently, about 4 months ago, I was elected chief of my community. And I think that that was a huge reflection of where our community is because I don't have a large last name. I don't have some like special reason. It's just because of the deliverables we've been able to provide the community and demonstrate what we're doing. We do regular open houses so community can share feedback, yell at me if they don't like something that we're working on. But the goal is to make sure that their voices are always heard in guiding these decisions. The other benefit that I have is I don't live on the reserve. And so I don't care necessarily what paint color, how many bedrooms, what all of the community's voice has shaped those decisions. And I think that transparency has also increased trust within our community. And so we're in a very good position. And I ran against the sitting chief as well as a community member who's been on council for a very long time, who's been on council long enough where it was kind of seen as he would be the next person because he had been on for about 6 years and the sitting chief. And so I didn't know how I would do. But I ended up getting elected and being put into this position, and I believe that that was just because of the performance we've been able to show as a community, and that I didn't have that long track record of not doing things. Both others, no disrespect to them, but they'd been 6 years on council. I was only 3, and there was not a lot of changes during both of their terms. And so I think being able to show those results is really important. And I think the way I'd tie that in is just to make sure that when you're thinking about where you work and what you're doing and where you want to go over a 5 year trajectory, asking yourself, what does my boss need from me? What do I need to do? Where do I want to be? What skills do I need to develop in order to reach some of those goals that I have for myself? Because so often, your boss is nervous to ask you to do more or knows that you're spread thin. And most people will say, like, I'm spread too thin already. I can't take anything else on. And that may be true, but it would be worth considering how can I rearrange my schedule? What are my priorities and where do I want to be in 5 years? And I think those can be really heavy conversations for yourself because it puts things into reality. But what I fear for so many young people right now is that they feel so disenfranchised that they're not even bothering with the planning process. And that plan might not look exactly how you want it to look, but at least if you know where you are, you know what you might need to do to get to where you want to go. And like the main one that I think of is this housing market challenge. It just looks insurmountable right now. But if you develop at least a 3 year plan in regards to where you want your career to be, that will allow you to see different opportunities arise over the next 5 years. And so just continuing to upskill yourself, do things like this, and get in contact with people because I think another regular thing we hear is relationships are key. And I never realized how important that was. But as chief, I don't do everything. I have to trust so many people and I have to bring in good talent in order to support the work that we're doing. And that provides people opportunities. There's been people who've been with the band for 20 years doing the same job and asking them, where do you want to go from here? You've been here, you're ready to grow. How do we support that? Has just allowed people to rethink what their direction is. And I think sometimes we end up on a train track and we're just going in one direction, but really zooming out and going, where do I want to end up and how do I maximize the direction I want to go? Is my focus family? Is it bringing in more income? Like, what is actually your top priority and how do you want to get there? I think are important questions that we get uncomfortable asking ourselves sometimes because we're just doing the same old thing. And I think like one quote that always stays with me is this idea that like some people stay in the same job for 10 years and don't even notice and wake up one day and go like, this is not where I thought I'd be. And I think just making sure you check in with yourself, am I going in the direction I want to go in, and am I reaching the goals that I want to achieve for myself? Because ultimately it will be the benefit for your children or your grandchildren or your family, what you're able to pass on to them. And I think the other question we have to regularly ask ourselves is, what legacy am I trying to leave for myself and for my family, and what does my last name mean to me? I have many family members that have stolen like Dairy Queen cakes when I was working at Dairy Queen. Like my last name was not something I was necessarily proud of because of what it meant within my community and within my region. And I've been able to turn that around and make my last name something that many of my family members can be really proud of because of the difference that name has been able to make. And I love that about indigenous communities, that those kinship ties are really important because they really make you think like, what does that last name mean? Maybe you have a friend who has a last name that's like very professional or very respected, and thinking about why that is, and can you grow that for yourself? And so the last piece that I want to touch on is just the podcast. um, I never thought I would host one. I never thought this would be the realm that I would enter, but I got frustrated during my law school education that I didn't know or have very many role models, people that I actually admired. And I didn't know how people became accountants or judges or went on to do really amazing things. And so I started a podcast. It was called the Bigger Than Me podcast in 2020. Everybody was at home, so I decided to start one from home. And I started interviewing professors, educators, community members, community leaders, and just getting an understanding of what they were doing and how they got there. They started out as 3 hour long interviews. And over time, I honed that skill and made them much, much shorter. But since then, I've been able to interview people like David Suzuki and Rick Hansen and the Premier of British Columbia, members of Parliament, local chiefs, people who are making a real difference. And I was blown away by how eager everybody was to share their story and how they got to where they are. Because so many people work so hard and never get any acknowledgement for it, any understanding of all the things that they went through to get there. And so that opened a ton of doors and it built a lot of confidence within myself to believe that I could share my voice and my viewpoints. And so that has since transitioned. Now I've changed the name of the podcast to Nuanced about 6 months ago. And the reason for that was because I'm now comfortable sharing my own voice. And so for the 2025 budget, I did a full breakdown. It was about an hour long on what was the budget, what is a good budget typically, what does a budget mean for Canadians? And this budget took 6 months for the government to develop. What's in it, and how does it apply to everyday people? How does it impact the cost of living, housing, affordability, all of these pieces? I've done one on taxes and how taxation came about. And Alberta is a really interesting case because you don't have provincial sales tax. Every other province does and has for a very long time. And Alberta has basically sworn to never bring in a PST. Why is that? How was that developed? And it was really interesting to hear some of the Alberta leaders say, like, the richness under the soil will always pay for the social services above the soil. And just hearing the understanding that political leaders in Alberta have had, and how each province came to their own position based on different things. But I think my biggest takeaway of that aspect of taxation was the governments gave a reason for why they were taxing, and that reason often hasn't lived out to today. So many of the original reasons given have shifted away, and just making sure that everyday people are able to understand what their government is doing and why. And so I've done more podcasts on that. I did a breakdown of like the Cowichan tribes decision and what that means for British Columbians and how that impacts title, because it's a very contentious issue, as you may know, within our province right now. And it's created a real divide between British Columbians and First Nations people, and trying to bridge that divide and take a nuanced perspective that doesn't just pick one side, but tries to bring everybody back to the table for an understanding. And so that's been a huge privilege to develop, but it really just came down to sitting down and being willing to take a risk and invite people on a show with crappy webcams and grow over time and iterate to trying to improve to something. I ended up moving into a very professional studio, and I'm now leaving that studio. And as you might be able to see, I'm moving that studio back home now, where we'll be able to host more and more people. I was controlled by a studio's scheduling time, and now I can interview when I'm available and I'm able to sit down. And so um, that's that piece and some of the work that I've been doing. Is there any questions so far or any pieces that folks would be interested in me elaborating on? I'll die if anybody doesn't have any questions. I'll just melt into a pile of goo.
I guess the only question that I can see that I have, young leader to another leader, is when you step into a room full of many people who may be even twice your age, like, how do you get over that barrier of feeling like you're too young or feeling like your voice doesn't matter?
That's a really, really good question. I would say the first piece is knowing what's going on in the room. What's the topic of the room? And making sure that you go in ready to discuss whatever the topic is. And so when I was meeting with the premier, we were talking about the hotel opportunity. So I had all of my information in regards to that opportunity. And then I guess as a young leader, I also think of all the people who wanted me to be in that position, who've supported me and their expectation that I deliver. As an elected person, I know I have community members who are relying on me to make sure that their quality of life is improved over the term of my leadership. But as a young leader, I imagine you have friends, family, people who believe in you, who want you to go on to succeed. And so I think carrying their voices into those rooms and knowing that they believe in you, so you need to believe in yourself in those types of spaces, and make sure that you're delivering for them, but also delivering for yourself. And I think the main thing, tragic as it might be, is usually the people that you're intimidated by are A, not that intimidating, and at times it can be really disappointing to meet your heroes or people you think know much more than you, because often they don't, or they don't have the same understanding that you do. I did see some. Are there questions in the chat? Does that answer that question?
Yes, that answers it perfectly. It's a lot of great points that I'm going to take into the rooms that I'm going into. Thanks, Aaron.
Absolutely.
I just have a comment. I liked how you, because sometimes when well, when I, listen to leaders, such as yourself, and like we had Trishelle Bunn we spoke with, 2 nights ago. Um, what comes to mind when we have these younger leaders is like, how did you know this is what you wanted to do? And um how did you end up, well, I know you kind of told some of your story there and how you ended up to where you are now, but how does that all come into play, I guess? Um because you guys are pretty, like, you're very young, like, wow, it's pretty awesome. And I believe that all of these when we think of chief and councils, it's always like the same ones, like you said, that been in that position for years. And of course, the family thing, because that happens in my own reserve, and like nothing ever changes. Not where I come from Little Pine First Nation. And I mean, it's very, I'm not going to say it's very secluded, but it's a res, down in a prairie, and there's not much, not much. I think we're in between Lloyd and North Battleford. Um, there's just no change, no opportunity there. And I know they're going through an election this month. I think the 24th is the voting day. But I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of going off track here. But it's just kind of like, it's so interesting that the young generations that are coming into these big positions, and I think that's so freaking cool. And I'm like, geez, like now I want to go take criminology and, native studies. Cause like in my job, I work, can do is all economic development. And now I've been in this job for going on 3 years, and I see how I never seen it before, how important it is in First Nation communities, like how important economic development is. And I'm like, wow, now I'm starting to see things. I'm like, too bad I couldn't, like, now I was like, I want to help my own nation, but I don't live there. It's in Saskatchewan. I live in Alberta. But anyway, I just thought, just a comment, like, I think it's really awesome that these younger generations are taking these positions and making actual change in their communities. And like, have you thought, did you think you were gonna come in this position before, or it just kind of happened? It just laid out for you and
Correct. I would say my approach to life has been just looking at what the next step might be.
mm,
And then just if I commit to something, going all in and doing everything I can to do it properly, to do it thoughtfully, and to do it better than anybody has ever done. And so when I was a native court worker, I like, if you ask the executive director today, I was like, I had the maximal amount of numbers. I was traveling across British Columbia to try and reach new regions to make sure that they were served. I was creating a Gladue letter system so that we could report on people's circumstances. Like any innovative idea I could have, I tried to run with as fast as possible, and to differentiate myself from everybody else in what I was doing. Then I went on to law school and I saw what the herd of people were all doing, and they were all doing the same type of thing, cozying up to professors, cozying up to law companies, and trying to get into the fast track for those types of positions. And I'm not good at copying those people. Everybody's going one way. I want to find a different path that's unique to me. And so when I graduated, going on to become a council member, I said, I want to do this. I want to be one of the greatest council members of all time. If you look at my track record, I want you to say, I don't know how this guy got all of these things done, and taking a different approach than everybody else. Like I wanted to stand out amongst all. And like I know we don't keep track of things the way people keep track of like hockey scores and how hockey players perform, but I still bring that mentality of like I want to get the most shots on net. Like I want to be one of the strongest council members in terms of funding we've brought in, and demonstrate a difference. And so when you share your story of where your community is, I think, well, Saskatchewan, they're all thinking in the same kind of like one community copies what another community does. You're outside of that kind of bubble that they live in. So you see what Alberta First Nations are doing and how they're innovating. And I would say Alberta First Nations are some of the most like advanced in terms of economic development. So do you have friends in Alberta in some of these dev corps that you can ask questions to? Can you learn from them? And then can you reach out to your nation and go, hey, I've learned a ton over here. Maybe I can do a bit of consulting work. Maybe I can share contacts and make sure they know about best practices. Is there a way you can start to build a group of people who are going to ask tough questions to those elected leaders? The big challenge I see so many First Nations have is that electoral process, it's hollow. And so I believe in a democratic process, but if you don't have the democratic elements to it, it's not really a democratic process. You have to ask questions. Your elders need to ask questions to those leaders. They need to say, what are you going to do if you get reelected? What did you do this term? How are you going to do it better than the last time? How are you going to make sure our members are not in poverty? And work with others to deliver that. And then that made and has made my community like their eyes have been opened because I did all candidates forums where I rented the gym. I sat down and I said, ask me questions about what I'm going to do. And the other council members who had positions were invited to attend. They didn't, but that's because they felt very uncomfortable being asked those types of questions. And so creating that space, then the community comes out and they go, guess who's not here? All those people who are running every year and they don't want to face the music. They don't want to answer those questions. And so being strong in the fact that you are a member, you have the right to ask questions. Just because you're not on reserve does not make you any less of a member. Like those are all things that I feel like discouraged me from thinking it was possible. But when my elders reached out and said, you need to get in here. We need change. Like our children are dying. In my province, our community in Hope, we have the highest suicide ideation rate of youth across British Columbia right now. And like that was a question I posed during our All Candidates Forum in our last election. What are the other leaders going to do about this? Because this is an existential problem. If we're losing young people because they're hopeless, that's on them. Like, and I carry a lot of weight on my shoulders because I believe every youth that dies during my tenure is my fault because I play a role in how things are done. And it's a lot of weight. It's very stressful. And like I don't always get a good sleep in regards to that, but they elected me to address these issues. And if I'm not tortured by the fact that people are living in abject poverty, then I'm not doing my job properly. And if your leaders aren't, you have to ask why, and why are you running if you're not trying to bring change to these circumstances? And I would say there is such a lack of people in the economic development space in BC, and I imagine in other provinces, that actually know anything. We have like in terms of snake oil salesmen, we have like a 10 to 1 where we get contacted by some faker who's like, I'm going to make your nation rich. You just give me a clean $250,000 and I'm going to turn that into a whole casino resort for you. Like people who will just tell you they'll give you the world and give you nothing. That's who we deal with on a regular basis, and we have to weed those people out. But people who are genuine in wanting better for the community, genuine in wanting to make sure that those profits go towards their membership and making sure that quality of living improves. Like those people are rare. So I would say there's lots of space within that realm to learn because not a lot of people know it and to give back in all sorts of ways, whether that's consulting, starting a business, or joining your chief and council and working alongside them. There's lots of different avenues to support that. And there's just a sorrow lack of people who are doing economic development for altruistic reasons. A lot of them are doing it to make money for themselves. And so that's one of the biggest differentiators that you can bring is like, hey, I'm not here to just take from the pie and put it in my own pockets. I want better for the people around me. You'll stand out significantly in a lot of these rooms when we're talking about economic development. Does that answer that question?
Yes, thank you. Wow. Awesome. Thank
Other questions, reflections on the rants that I've just gone on? I guess I would, if it's okay, I would just close by telling people that during these tough economic times, because we're seeing it with inflation and the cost of living, a lot of the spending that's been done over the past years is going to negatively impact people on fixed incomes. That's my community who are on social assistance, who are like that social assistance rate isn't going up at the same rate inflation is, right? And so those are the things to think about. But I think in a time where, like, I don't know if you've heard, but like Canada's productivity is really low right now, and it's a huge concern for the federal government. Our spending has been out of control. And I think where that places us is if you are willing to put in the work, doors are going to fly open because we need qualified people. And our First Nation communities need that more than anything else. Like, it took us 8 months to find a good chief administrative officer. And they came with zero chief administrative officer experience because we don't care about that. We care about who's going to care about our staff. Our staff have never had support, they've never had kindness or understanding. And so I think how your personality shows up in the work that you do is going to become more and more important. I don't foresee, in my humble opinion, degrees on degrees on degrees being how we make decisions over the next 10 years. I think it's going to be how you show up, the energy that you bring to it, and the compassion you show for your fellow employees. Like, having those pieces is to me more important in at least our organization right now than the credentials that somebody comes with. Because those credentials don't mean, like, particularly for economic development, you could have a master's in business, but if you never started a business, you have no idea what you're doing because it's all theoretical when you're just doing an MBA. It's real when you're looking at community members who don't have jobs and trying to figure out how to support them. And that gives you inclinations as to how you want to get there. And so, for people interested in learning more about how we did it, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned on our economic development plan. It's available on our website. How we approach the community, what our community told us, is all available. And that planning piece for First Nation communities is incredibly important and it's absolutely missing. And so, no, whether you're interested in that piece or anything else, there's just so many opportunities to say, this is my brand. Like, who am I? I'm a person who's passionate, dedicated. I want to be unique in this way, figuring out what those pieces are, and then going looking for the opportunities. Because I don't see that education bubble in your resume mattering as much as the who that shows up in the room and the drive that you're willing to do it. And I think that that also becomes real because so many people, if you're working for an insurance company, like, you don't care about what you do. But when you get to work with your people or with a First Nation community, you know that what you do has a tangible impact on the people who live there. And if you do a great job, their life gets better. And it's a reoccurring relationship. And so the growth that I've gotten to see within my community and the, like, their hope and optimism increasing has given me more passion to do even better. And so surrounding yourself with that type of thinking, like, we're trying to hire for a bunch of positions and making sure they all come to the table with a desire to just do the best job. We'll figure out how to pay them what they're worth. But if they want to go do an amazing job, we just need to unlock the door and let them run with it. And I think that's the direction more and more organizations are moving, is like tangible results. What are you doing different than everybody else? And so I think there's going to be more and more opportunities for everybody on this call. Economic development is sorely needed in so many First Nation communities, and so many communities are just, like, no disrespect to them, just going about it in all the wrong ways, that don't actually deliver quality of life increases. And, like, just by one quick example, we're bringing on the Sunrise expansion project from Enbridge, but that doesn't guarantee that my members are actually, they're going to have jobs as a consequence, right? That's my job to try and help them figure out. And if I'm a lazy leader, then we're going to get millions of dollars from the project, but if that doesn't feed into good jobs for our community, I really haven't done anything for their benefit. And so making sure you have those types of pieces thought through. And I know that's a huge opportunity. Like with what's going on with Alberta, I'm hearing their Premier Smith and Mark Carney are talking about a new pipeline. That's going to create opportunities, but not just working on the pipeline, but how do you engage First Nation communities? How do you make sure they have the jobs of the future? And I think that's where Kando and your team will be able to play a significant role in that, but only if you're rushing to those tables advocating to support First Nations with those opportunities, right? And making sure they don't get taken advantage of by snake oil salesmen and people who are not doing it for the right reasons. So I see a lot of opportunity. I know times are tough and they don't look great right now, but I just see huge opportunities for First Nation communities over the next 20 years. And if you have any questions or I can support in any way, I'm always happy to do so. Yes, Michaela.
Oh, hello. It's nice to meet you. I guess I just wanted to do a quick, I guess the reason I wanted to join, I saw the session just because I don't see a lot of like Indigenous just leaders within Canada. And for me personally, like I'm Indigenous Dene from the Northwest Territories, and I don't know much about economic development. And I guess the best way I could describe it for like Indigenous people, it's like maybe we die for lack of knowledge. That's the way I could describe it. And I guess for me, I'm in a completely different field. I'm in my last year of nursing school as an Indigenous nursing student. And I think for me, like a lot of my life changed, I would say in January 2024. I gave my very first speech with the Chief Nursing Officer of Canada, Lee Chapman. And from that, I became a motivational speaker to inspire Indigenous people of Canada. And I recently was on CBC radio this past July. And I think the most rewarding part was I got a letter of support from Wab Canoe just wishing me well in my healthcare studies. So I know I want to help decrease like discrimination for like Indigenous people in healthcare. But I know as like when I'm done nursing school, I just want to learn more about, I guess, what you said, economic development, all the other issues that Indigenous people face.
Beautiful. Well, congratulations first to you. That's incredible. I'm very happy to hear that. And I hope you're very proud of yourself and what you've been able to achieve. And I guess just like right off the bat, when I hear that story, there's clearly a gap. Like I know BC has it as well, as to how do they address that discrimination. And I think like in that space, there's like government doesn't know the answer. As I was describing a little bit earlier, like we walk into rooms and we're nervous, but often the people we're going to explain the problem to, they don't have the solution either. And so it would be for yourself a personal opportunity. Do you have a solution? Can you identify the problems that you see and start to offer a course or a training program or something to health authorities to address the discrimination? For First Nation communities, I know like bringing our health services back to our community, we're trying to get a health building built. Having a structure, what does it take to make sure that you're offering good quality services within the community? You can be a pioneer of that and giving guidance to First Nation communities on how to do that in a holistic and thoughtful way. Because many of us, like right now, we're trying to talk to the province about how we do this. But we don't have someone like yourself who understands both worlds, who can help us make more informed decisions. Many times, government will say, well, you can make this culturally respectful for yourself. But we don't always know what that looks like in terms of healthcare services. How do we offer a more indigenous approach to nursing? I wouldn't have the answer to that. You would. And so I see opportunities for yourself to grow a business there and say, I have some insights that most people don't have about how to address this problem. And then taking that to health authorities and going, I have some ideas on how you can address this. And then you've started to create systemic change within those organizations to make sure they're serving Indigenous people well. And you could also have one for First Nation communities to make sure they're serving their own membership well. Because engagement on these issues, like if I were to ask my members, what does Indigenous healthcare look like to you? Many of them don't know because they're on social assistance just getting by. They don't know how a nurse does their job or what that might look like. And so always thinking, how can I create something where there's a problem, discrimination within the workforce and discrimination in hospitals and healthcare centers? And what do I know that the rest of everybody else doesn't know that I can start to create a curriculum, a training program, courses, or information for governments to make more informed decisions. And then you're creating that macro impact to the communities, but you're also creating a sustainable business for yourself that First Nations can tap into when they're ready to address healthcare within their own communities in a thoughtful way, because you have the knowledge, nursing, which many First Nation communities don't have, that you're able to tie in with the culture piece that communities often have, but making sure there's that tie-in I see as being really important as we try and address the health outcomes for Indigenous people on reserve.
Thank you so much. I learned so much in that quick session. Yeah, I just don't meet a lot of like Indigenous leaders or just Indigenous people that think alike, that have a passion for making change in Canada. So thank you. It was wonderful to meet you and everyone else.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you all for having me today. Is there any last questions before we wrap up? All
Awesome.
right.
Well, if we have no more questions, I think that'll just about do it for us. Thank you again, Aaron, for sharing your insights and expertise with us today. I'd like to take another moment to extend our gratitude to the Starks Foundation. And before we go, please complete the evaluation survey that'll be sent out after the session. Thank you all for being here today. Stay inspired, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you again, Aaron.
My pleasure.